How do you do? Thank you.
James Bond is one of the longest franchises in cinema history, and each entry is evidence of the content that the audience demanded at the time. Bond's weapons, skills, and character depth evolved with time, and even though it's not been a smooth transition, it makes for one of the most remarkable aspects to look into over the 27 films over about 60 years. However, one trend that's been unshakable throughout this franchise is the character of the Bond girl, and over the years, we've gotten some really badass characters in these movies. Let's glance over some of these badass Bond girls and their interesting arcs as they're paired with 007. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Honey Rider. Dr. No is the first of the numerous James Bond films that'd give us the adventures of 007, and it's amongst the best in the series. Sean Connery perfectly fits into Bond's character, and his charm manages to pave the way for the Bond girls to chime in with him smoothly. Talking about Bond girls, Honey Rider would be considered the first Bond girl in the movies, but that's a mistake that can be explained. Entering the screen with a white bikini as she emerges from the sea and takes off a diving mask, it had become one of the most famous scenes defining the Bond film genre. Ursula Andress was a stunning choice for the film. Even though specific arrangements were made to make her appear in Jamaica, she was given a tan, and her lines were redubbed by the voice actor Nicky van der Zyl to cover for her thick Swiss-German accent. Ryder was given a tragic arc that fit into the narrative and explained why she had to seek revenge when Dr. No's goons destroyed her boat. The actor was supposed to return for future sequels, but these plans were cancelled, and only a small reference to it is made in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where Bond examines the knife she'd given him as a souvenir. Honey Rider would impact pop culture entirely, and you'd be surprised to know that Anthony Horowitz named the popular character Alex Rider after James Bond. Over the years, Honey's been voted the best Bond girl ever. Sylvia Trench. Sylvia Trench, an overlooked character, played a pivotal role in the Bond franchise. Without her, we wouldn't have had the iconic scene where Bond lights his cigarette and introduces himself, "My name's Bond, James Bond." The significance of this moment is that Bond intended to mimic Sylvia's tone. While Honey Rider gave us the iconic scene, Sylvia Trench is officially the first Bond girl to appear in these movies. We don't see much action from her, except for a time spent in Bond's room, but she returns in the sequel right before Bond leaves for his next mission under Miss Moneypenny's orders. Eunice Gayson is the perfect choice for the director's role. Terence Young got her in by mentioning that she brings luck into his various projects, but then we're very well aware that Gayson got the role because of her figure and the charm she shows the first time we see her on screen. Trench is the only one of the Bond girls that the spy meets at a casino who ends up surviving. There are similarities to the plans for Honey Rider and Sylvia, in that Sylvia was also planned to become a recurring character, but those plans were scrapped, and her voice was also redubbed because it felt as if it was too posh for the character. Tatiana Romanova. Tatiana Romanova is the leading Bond girl in the 1963 film From Russia with Love, and this character would also appear in a future Bond game inspired by her appearance in the movie. Similar to Bond, she works for the Soviet Army Intelligence, and she has a photo of Bond before actually meeting him in person. According to her, she fell in love with the image, and when she saw him, she said that he looked nicer than his photograph. Bond replies with a flirtatious remake as he tells her she's the most beautiful girl ever. We'd agree with Bond, but knowing Bond, it won't be surprising to see that he's used that line before. The move in the end when she makes the call to kill Klebb even though she'd ordered to kill Bond concludes the film. Miss Universe runner-up Daniela Bianchi was cast as Tatiana, and she formed a fine pair with the Bond actor who was also Mr. Universe. Even though she tried to fit into the character by taking lessons for the English accent, she'd later be redubbed by British stage actress Barbara Jefford. Right before her shooting was supposed to begin, Daniela got into an accident, and this would be the first in a series of accidents involving director Terence Young's helicopter crash. Anyway, the character left quite the mark, and it was planned that she'd return for 1977's The Spy Who Loves Me, but the plans were dropped. Even though it's not confirmed, it might have been because Daniela retired from acting.
Well, dress rehearsal went like a dream, Skipper.
Good. You'll get your final briefing tonight.
Pussy galore. Now, there's a reason why the James Bond films massively influenced Austin Powers, and one of the critical factors is the names of the various Bond girls. We had Honey Rider, and now we have Pussy Galore, whose name became more highlighted when Sean Connery pronounced it with his thick accent. Pussy Galore appeared in the 1964 film Goldfinger, and she makes her entry when Bond is kidnapped and taken to Goldfinger on a flight. This character is quite complicated, considering Bond easily convinces her to go against Goldfinger. If it weren't for her, Bond wouldn't have been able to thwart Goldfinger's plans. In the end, Bond does manage to escape with her, but her fate, which must have involved being imprisoned under charges of working with Goldfinger, is never really resolved. We only know that Bond got to sleep with her at least once before his next mission. Late actor Honor Blackman took on the role of this bossy persona, and it's clearly because of her somewhat similar performance in the popular British series The Avengers. The actor was ideal for the role of one of the first Bond girls amongst the few who initially rejected Bond's advances and then caved in. Pussy Galore is still high in pop culture, and that's because almost every spy parody has made fun of the name. Austin Powers had a lot of vagina as a direct reference to Honor's character. Blackman's performance became the primary influence for the character in the various James Bond games that have come out over the years. We only wish she hadn't caved into Bond's advances after trying to be resilient. It would have been an exciting choice for a Bond girl character then. Teresa Di Vincenzo, Tracy Bond. Bond girls often bring a certain depth to Bond in terms of how they're associated with the spy, and one concrete example is the character of Tracy Bond. Believe it or not, Bond married the daughter of a crime syndicate, Mark Ange Draco, in George Lazenby's only outing as Bond on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Why did Lazenby get only one Bond film? Now that's a discussion for an entire video of its own. But Bond married Tracy after they'd met in Portugal, under the deal that Draco would provide Bond with the whereabouts of Ernst Stavro Blofeld. It might now sound like a solid reason, but then it's better than the £1 million dowry that Draco was offering instead. This arc manages to humanize Bond, and he falls for Tracy while she does the same. We see real romance happening on screen while Bond fights the goons. But it's all too good to be accurate, as when they're driving away from the wedding ceremony in their car, Irma Bunt shows up and opens fire at them with a machine gun, killing Tracy. Even though the film indicates that Bond will take revenge for this death, we don't see him do this until For Your Eyes Only, where he's seen at her grave, and by the end he manages to kill Blofeld by setting a booby trap. In the following additions to the franchise, the fact that he'd failed to protect someone would sometimes pop up, and Bond would often react, which was a reference to Tracy. But then it could be the other woman he'd failed to protect from murder, considering Tracy was fifth on the list, but she was the only one that left him widowed. Even though the movie might not be among the most memorable Bond films, the story still holds up, and Diana Rigg's take on Tracy Bond deserves due credit. Even though Brigitte Bardot was the intended person for the casting, we're glad that Diana Rigg took on the role following her success in another spy series, The Avengers. Solitaire. There are many reasons why Live and Let Die is one of the best Bond films, and apart from Roger Moore's debut as Bond, Jane Seymour's Solitaire is one of them. Now, Solitaire, an employee of Kananga, the main villain as a psychic medium, had a rather exciting problem regarding issues in the lives of Bond girls. Solitaire wasn't one of those fake psychic mediums and managed to predict reality. She also predicted Kananga's death, but then her powers were associated with her virginity, and losing it would mean she'd lose her powers. So Bond goes in and does the deed, and she loses her powers. But Solitaire has a more substantial answer here when Kananga asks for an explanation. Solitaire states that she predicted that she would fall in love with Bond, and that's why she went ahead with the way things were supposed to go. And Bond does his part by rescuing her from being sacrificed as her punishment for betraying Kananga. Bond uses her to his benefit by taking her to his side, which 007 has a good experience with, but Solitaire never helps Bond throughout the film. Even though that only makes her another damsel in distress, it's still surprising that she had solid reasoning to agree to go with Bond because the authenticity of her powers was justified. The character was initially supposed to be changed from Ian Fleming's book to a black woman, and Diana Ross was even considered for the role. However, the producers decided to stick with the white woman, and they wanted to put Catherine Deneuve into the role. But since the deal fell apart, Jane Seymour ended up getting cast. Anya Amasova, the spy who loved me, pits James Bond against a woman who competes with him in espionage and proves formidable with her skills. MI6 and the KGB assign Bond and Anya to the mission while they're working on something else. The first interaction in Egypt doesn't go as smoothly as Anya mistakes Bond for a killer and asks her thugs to fight him. It's only later that they formally introduce each other, and Anya's done her research and manages to prick him by reminding him of his failure to protect Tracy. They continue to compete and fall in love, which impacts her mission as she fails to kill Bond in the end, which is one of her objectives. So in a way, Bond wins again and manages to woo the spy who was proven to be quite the competitor in his field of work after all. Barbara Bach managed to bring every element of the character that made it quite a problematic pairing for Bond, hence she's among the best Bond had to go on a mission with. She was good enough, and if she'd been given more depth, she could have been one of those Bond girls who could have had their own spin-off film. Yeah, some of them exist, but we'll discuss them later. Anya has a reason to kill Bond, but throughout the movie, in the typical fashion of Bond films, she overcomes that reason and gets wooed by Bond. Would you be surprised to find that Bond killed her boyfriend, and she let it go because Bond explained the reason for killing to be self-defense? No, it's a James Bond film, after all. Melina Havlock. Melina Havlock had her reasons for assisting James Bond in killing the enemy in 1981's For Your Eyes Only. Her parents were working for the British Secret Service when Aristotle Christatos killed them through a hired assassin. She didn't stay and mourn their death and instead investigated the murders to find the killers and kill them herself. This drive would lead her to Madrid, where she'd kill Gonzalez, the assassin, but she'd also come across James Bond. Bond would help her escape and suggest that she stay back and not get involved, but the fact that Gonzalez was a hired killer only meant that Melina wasn't stopping. Eventually, the two would team up and Melina would be an essential asset in investigating the murders and the motive behind them. Finally, when Melina manages to hold Christatos with a gun, she's very much into killing him, but Bond stops her by telling her it would make her no more different than Christatos. Even though she stopped, Christatos was knifed to death by Colombo as he was reaching for a knife to attack her. For someone who's never stepped into this world and is innocent, Carole Bouquet perfectly fits the part and brings some gravity to the character. Bouquet initially auditioned for the role of Holly Goodhead in Moonraker, and we're glad to see that she got this role instead. It'd be the first time that we'd witness a Bond girl driven to murder the people who had killed her parents and take part in Bond's work. Surprisingly, Bouquet couldn't dive, which was found during the filming. Hence, all her underwater scenes were done in slow motion. Bubbles were added with special effects to complete the scene. Mayday. Mayday is a fatal Bond girl, and there were times when she could have killed Bond even though things didn't turn out in her favor in the end. She was Max Zorin's lover and bodyguard, and even though she was a human, she possessed some abnormal strength, which could be explained by her being the result of an experiment by the Nazi scientist Dr. Hans Glau. Zorin tasked her with killing the detective and investigating the Jockey Club, and she succeeded, but it was here that she came across Bond dining with the detective at the Eiffel Tower. As Bond went after her, she parachutes off across Paris. Bond investigates the matter more gravely and eventually manages to seduce her, trying to cover up his association with the case at hand. But Zorin reveals his identity, and Mayday goes to kill Bond by drowning Bond in his Rolls Royce. She thinks that she succeeded and goes on with her work until the news of him being alive reaches her, so she ends up killing his CIA contact and stages him for the murder. But later in the movie, when Zorin almost kills her for the sake of his plans, she ends up helping Bond but ends up dying as she prevents a mine from exploding that could have killed her associates. Grace Jones balanced the cold killer and the emotional persona of Mayday, and if it weren't for her, then we wouldn't have had that fun little cameo from Dolph Lundgren in the movie when he plays a KGB operative. Like most other Bond girls though, Mayday thought for a second that Bond loved her, even though 007 was using her, as he does with most of his women. The fact that Zorin betrayed her, she didn't think twice, and went against him as her people were dying shows that she cared for her people. Xenia Onatopp. Xenia Onatopp was a fighter pilot for the USSR, but after the collapse of the USSR, she joined hands with Electra King for the Janus crime syndicate. To be very honest, Xenia was a sadist and killing people brought a certain thrill to her, and it also proved that she didn't have any conscience. Being ruthless and sexy works to her benefit, and she kills one of her victims in the film just by crushing him with her thighs while they're having sex. She even tries this move on Bond multiple times. The last time she does it, Bond almost succumbs to it, but in a somewhat ironic manner, she gets squeezed by the branches of a tree that looks like the letter Y and dies. Onatopp was one of the most different attempts at a Bond girl, and Famke Janssen ultimately gives into this maniacal character. Her choke move gives her a sexual thrill, and that sounds like a crazy femme fatale to us. But then she could have continued to appear opposite Bond because at times it feels as if she's way better than the primary antagonist in GoldenEye, Alexia Auriacos, played by Sean Bean. GoldenEye is one of the best entries in the James Bond franchise, marking a solid return with Pierce Brosnan's debut as Bond. Famke Janssen's character provides fresh air from the various Bond girls we've seen. Wayin. Michelle Yeoh was at the height of her action films at this time, and after competing with Jackie Chan, she was a fitting choice for taking on the role of a Bond girl. Yeoh appears as Wayin, an operative of the Chinese People's External Security Force who becomes Bond's ally as they investigate the disappearance of stolen material with Elliot Carver's involvement. At first, they think they've been sent to kill each other, but later, they manage to sit down and become allies to go against Carver. Wayin is not an easy lover. She proves to be one of the best allies Bond might have gotten, as she manages to distract Carver around the end so that Bond can get them out. Finally, they become lovers after saving the world from Carver's attempts. Again, Wayin could have used more in character development to become someone who could have used a spin-off film. Sometimes you're left wishing we had many more hand-to-hand combats with Michelle Yeoh, but being a 007 feature, most of the attention is focused on him, while James Bond focuses on action. Wayin proves to be more in terms of stealth, which works to the benefit of the duo. Michelle Yeoh nails the role, and considering it was an attempt to involve her in the Bond feature, this movie sticks out from most of the other Bond films. But we won't mind seeing more martial arts in future James Bond films because this film made the excellent guys way better than the bad guys. Natalia Simonova. While Xenia was busy trying to kill Bond every chance she got, Natalia helped him out as an ally to stop Boris Grishenko, played by a young Alan Cumming as he helped out Alec Trevelyan. Natalia was working as a level 2 programmer when Boris betrayed her and her team and left them for dead as he joined Trevelyan's team. While her teammates died due to the electromagnetic pulses that were fired to destroy the center where she was working, Natalia managed to survive somehow. Natalia believed Boris wasn't aware of what happened and decided to meet him, only to fall into his trap and get caught by Xenia. In this circumstance, she'd come across Bond, and they'd understand they can help each other with Bond's espionage and Natalia's soft skills. In the end, the two manage to kill Trevelyan, and she also gets her sweet revenge on Boris, who dies after being frozen with liquid nitrogen. Natalia's another example of a Bond girl who serves some purpose in Bond's mission and helps him kill the enemy before they succeed in their plans. Even though she doesn't have skills in fighting the enemy, the fact that she's better than Boris when it comes to the computer only helps Bond at various points throughout the story. Isabel Scorupco fits into the hacker's character and provides the perfect Bond girl who's of great help compared to most other Bond girls. After all, if it weren't for her helicopter rescue, Bond would have died along with Trevelyan by falling off the antenna in the end. Cara Milano. Even though Timothy Dalton had a short stint as Bond, coming next to George Lazenby with only 2 features, Dalton did manage to leave a mark with a tonal shift in his Bond films. The tonal shift required a change from the usual arc of the Bond girls, and this is where Cara Milano comes in. She's simply getting used by her boyfriend, General Koskov, the villain. Bond ends up trusting her initially, only for her to be fooled by Koskov and get Bond caught. But luckily she comes to her senses and finds out Koskov is using her, retaking Bond's side. Yeah, that is confusing. I'm sure she was confused about whose side to take herself. Even though she didn't help much in the practicality, she did pilot the plane while Bond fought Necros at the back. Also, if it weren't for her cello case, Bond would have had difficulty sledging across the Austrian border. Cara's decision to help Bond even after knowing what she's getting involved in proves that she has the fearless qualities required for the situation. We wish she was slightly less naive and more aware of her boyfriend instead of holding him in such high regard. Mariam Darbo was a former model, and even though she wasn't given much to do, she landed on this list because of a somewhat crazy means of saving Bond from getting into a further mess. The actor's among the few who auditioned for a previous Bond girl role and made it into another Bond film. Electra King. Electra King is the first Bond girl to be the film's main antagonist, and she's pretty tricky when pitted against Bond. Electra had a wealthy upbringing and is as spoiled as they can be because she's used to getting what she wants. Reynard, the other villain in the film and an anarchist, had kidnapped her to get money out of her parents, but the parents didn't pay. This response provoked Electra to fall in love with Reynard, and she helped him extort money from her parents by acting as if she was traumatized by the ordeal. Electra also had an issue with 007's boss, M, because it was her advice not to pay the ransom money to Reynard. So, after managing to woo Bond, she kidnaps M and only manages to enrage Bond about how to deal with her. During her final interaction with Bond, she's confident that Bond won't kill her, but Bond's instincts in this matter kick in and he shoots her. Electra can perfectly exploit her opponent by giving the best performance to someone in pain, and it works most of the time. Even though Reynard was actively working on the evil plan, Electra had a significant role in the entire thing, and using her charm, she managed to make Bond believe otherwise. French actor Sophie Marceau proves she's an excellent choice to play this cunning character and makes us think about her situation until she betrays Bond. The idea of a rich girl getting kidnapped and then falling for the criminal is based on the actual case of Patty Hearst. Things got personal when she went for Bond's boss, something that hasn't been done before except for Raoul Silva in Skyfall. Jinx. You must have thought we were joking when we said that there's a category of Bond girls who were supposed to get their spin-off films, but Jinx was a contender, and her movie was already at work until Halle Berry went into a box office low with the release of Catwoman. In one of the worst entries in the film, Die Another Day, Jinx is an NSA agent who plays her part in investigating the case when she comes across Bond. While Bond could have teamed up with her and caught Zhao earlier in the story, they only team up when they save each other from Mr. Kill, who will kill Jinx. You'd think Bond would identify another spy when he comes across her based on his years of experience, but it seems that Jinx managed to fool him pretty quickly. Around the end, she gets pitted against Frost while Bond deals with Graves, and it creates a perfect balance considering this allows Jinx to prove her worth, getting equal screen time as James Bond. Halle Berry is Jinx, and Jinx was probably based on Halle Berry because the actor was the best choice for the film. The actor herself mentioned that Jinx is a significant move forward for the female characters in Bond films, which makes sense considering that she's also the first black heroine in Bond films. MGM had talked about a spin-off film for Jinx, just like they'd planned one for Michelle Yeoh's character from Tomorrow Never Dies, but none of the plans came through. Fans of Jinx won't be surprised to know that she holds the position of the 4th toughest girl on screen and deserves that credit.
When you supposed to enter so the others...
Vesper Lynd, Daniel Craig's first entry to the franchise, Casino Royale was the next-level attempt at making Bond relevant to modern times. The action was more complicated, the story was complex, and even the depth of the protagonist was focused on compared to his past renditions. However, the one thing that'll significantly change Bond is the new Bond girl, Vesper Lynd's arc in the film, as her fate haunts him for quite a while. She's introduced to Bond as a foreign liaison agent, and Bond immediately falls for her. The two go through quite a journey throughout the film. After the mission's success, Bond decided to leave his service to be with her. But this won't last long. Vesper was working for the terrorist organization Quantum because they'd taken her lover Yusuf Kabira hostage. Realizing the betrayal she'd done with Bond, she locks herself in the elevator, which sinks to the floor during the film's final moments while Bond desperately attempts to save her. Ava Green plays the role of Vesper Lynd. Even though her character dies in the film, her presence will be felt throughout future films. Vesper's death had such a substantial impact on Bond that he came to terms with the inability to be in relationships or have the chance to maintain them in the years to come. The fact that she didn't confide to Bond about her truth and instead took in with the enemies is what drove her to kill herself by drowning. Vesper would be the first scenario since Tracy in which Bond had almost contemplated the idea of a future with someone he loved. The movie was Ava Green's breakout role in Hollywood, and she'd give us some fantastic performances in the future. Camille Mond. Camille had a traumatic past, and her drive to avenge the murder of her family made a lot of sense with Olga Kurilenko's brilliant performance in Quantum of Solace. The stakes are high here, as Bond is going through his trauma following the events of Casino Royale, which somehow coincides with Camille in the story. However, her experience turns out to be quite amateurish as Bond helps her out, and she gets herself killed at various points. The tone of this film is relatively dark, as both Bond and Camille intend to destroy their enemies. Camille Mond is the first Bond girl to have no sexual intercourse with Bond, and Olga Kurilenko preferred this because the focus would stay on her performance. It's a weird category, but the character's a step up above Melina Havlock from For Your Eyes Only. Producer Barbara Broccoli loved the character and wanted her to return in a future Bond entry. Olga did most of the stunts herself, and she stated that she was inspired by past Bond girl Michelle Yeoh, who also did her own stunts.
How much do you know about fear?
All there is.
Severine. We finally get a femme fatale in Daniel Craig's James Bond flicks with Severine, and she proves her role as one of the representatives of Raoul Silva, the main villain. Bond witnesses her as she helps an assassin kill an art dealer, and in the end, she manages to witness Bond kill the assassin. He joins her later and reveals his true intentions, but she warns him, which is quite a turn in her persona compared to what we witnessed. Bond defeats her henchman and meets her at her yacht, the Chimera, which takes them to Silva's island. But Silva turns out to be quite ruthless, as he plans to improve Bond's marksmanship following his return to service after he was presumed dead by using Severine as the target. Bond misses her, but Silva follows him and shoots her straight in the head, killing her. Severine is the first such Bond girl in Daniel Craig's take on the character, and her dark past catches up with her. She joins Bond and ends up being bound by Silva, but this doesn't come to fruition. Interestingly, Berenice Marlowe sent her audition tape for Skyfall to Sam Mendes through Facebook, and even dreamt that she'd get to take on the role next to Javier Bardem. Even though her character is somewhat similar to Pussy Galore or Mayday, she doesn't have a personal loyalty to Silva.
We just need more time. If we only had more time.
Madeleine Swann. Bond falls for someone again and decides to leave the service. This time, the story has a much more complex ending than we might have wondered it would. Madeleine is first introduced in 2015's Spectre, when Mr. White asks him to go to her to uncover more of his secrets, and here we discover that she is White's daughter. Later, Blofeld manages to get hold of Swann to trap Bond, but Bond manages to save her and get hold of Blofeld, who was planning to escape using a helicopter. During their journey in this film, Bond falls for Madeleine and decides to get away with her, and the two go and start living in Matera. This relationship isn't well developed compared to his relationship with Vesper. However, it still feels like things have changed for Bond, only to discover that Blofeld's goons have found him. Blofeld manages to frame Madeleine so that Bond is convinced that Swann is responsible for giving away his location. He tells her he'll never see her again and puts her on a train while Swann fails to tell him major news that would have probably changed his reaction to the past events. The major news was that she was pregnant with his child, which Bond discovered about 5 years later when a mission put him back in action and he tracked her down to her childhood place. As Bond tries to express his regret, he's interrupted by a 5-year-old Mathilde and Madeleine, who cryptically explains who the father is. Now it's a Bond film, and the fact that he has a child proves to greatly help Lucifer Safin, as the spy is now liable. No Time to Die marks the death of Daniel Craig's Bond, and the last thing he finds before he dies is that Mathilde is his daughter. Following Bond's death, Madeleine is seen telling her daughter about Bond. Yeah, Leia Sedou's character in the film is the first time a Bond girl falls in love with Bond and becomes the mother of his child. Vesper inspires the character, and she even mentions Vesper in No Time to Die. Paloma. Based on Madeline's arc, it becomes clear that a lot was happening in No Time to Die, so there was hardly any time to focus on other aspects of the story. Bond's arc in this film overshadows the main antagonist's arc so much that Safin hardly gets a chance to make his name amongst Bond villains. Sorry, Rami Malek. However, one character took the entire focus during her short appearance, Ana de Armas's Paloma. There's no way that this character could be explained because she appears quite underconfident and then takes us by surprise with her skills in bringing down all the henchmen with so much ease. Even Bond seems surprised by her abilities. Yeah, she deserves her spin-off film. The movie gave us a female Bond with Nomi, another 00 agent from MI6, and Paloma still manages to take all the limelight. It could be Ana de Armas's charm that managed to give us some of the most exciting sequences in the film. Even though it's unclear whether Paloma will get her spin-off film or future appearances in the franchise, we're glad that she'll get a spin-off venture in the John Wick franchise film, Ballerina, even though No Time to Die fails at various marks in the film. Marvelous verdict. One of the most significant observations one can make about each of these Bond girls over time is the fact that they've evolved significantly. While the earlier roles became the firsts around the end, we also witnessed some firsts in aspects that put them at par with Bond regarding his skills. While there's still a lot of discussion regarding a female Bond in the future, the term Bond girl makes up for a much more significant character in the franchise. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.